We believe that the best way to learn the rubric and the criteria in it is to get some practice with hand-scoring sample student responses. But before we get you started, we will spend a little time walking through the process of gathering evidence and scoring. The goal of this next video is to orient you to a process for reading a student full-write response, tagging evidence within that response, and using evidence to make scoring decisions. There isn't a single best approach to going through this process, but we believe the most important aspect of the process we will suggest is to support evidence-based scoring. To fully benefit from viewing this video, you will need the following materials: the Grade 7 ELA Practice Performance Task entitled Napping from the Smarter Balanced Practice Test portal, the Smarter Balanced rubric for explanatory writing in grades 6 through 11, which is available with this video, and the student sample entitled Napping Sample A. Please pause the video and download these materials. Skim the Smarter Balanced Practice Performance Task and the explanatory writing rubric. The first step in the scoring process is to review the full-write task prompt. It's important to go back and quickly remind yourself of what the task prompt actually asked students to do. In this 7th grade explanatory task about napping, students are asked to produce a multi-paragraph explanatory essay about sleep and naps. Then, they are directed to use more than one source, of the 3 that are provided, to develop a thesis or controlling idea to explain about sleep and naps. Step 2 in the scoring process is to quickly review the relevant scoring rubric to remind yourself of the scoring dimensions to consider as you read the student sample. Finally, it's time to individually read the student sample. At this point, please pause the video and find the student essay called Napping Student A and a blank copy of the grade 6 through 11 explanatory rubric that accompanies this video lesson. Please review the rubric, then read the sample, keeping the rubric criteria in mind. Now that you've had a chance to read through the sample, I will walk through the process that we recommend you use when reading, gathering evidence, and scoring a student sample. You should have available 3 highlighters of different colors. It doesn't really matter what colors you use, but in this demo, we will use yellow for organization and purpose, green for evidence and elaboration, and blue for conventions. I will use these colors to tag evidence related to each scoring dimension while I read the student essay. I have broken down the process to focus on one dimension at a time, but you could tag pieces of evidence related to any of the scoring dimensions, as you notice them while moving through the essay. First, as I walk through this student essay, I look for a clear purpose, a thesis or controlling idea. In the first paragraph, I notice that the essay begins by introducing the idea that sleep is one of the most important activities for most animals. The essay goes into detail about the problem of a sleep-deprived populace, how shift workers, caregivers, and emergency responders may not be getting enough sleep. And at the end of the introduction, the essay introduces the topic of napping, but doesn't say much about it. In the second paragraph, the student introduces and develops the idea of the benefits of napping. And in the concluding paragraph, the essay reinforces the idea that naps are beneficial because they make people happier and more alert, and that napping is useful to humans. This seems like a pretty clear thesis. I think I've gathered enough evidence related to the essay's purpose, so I'm going to score that part of the rubric now. Using my yellow highlighter, I have selected the Level 3 score for the first indicator of the Organization and Purpose rubric. The controlling idea, that sleep is important and that napping is beneficial to people who need more sleep, is clear and evident in the essay as a whole. The essay does not introduce a thesis statement in the conventional way by stating it in the first paragraph. Rather, it becomes clearer and clearer as the essay progresses. Nonetheless, the introduction and conclusion are adequate. In the first paragraph, the essay introduces the importance of sleep in general and identifies a problem that napping solves, that of a sleep-deprived populace. The end of the first paragraph introduces the topic of napping. Subsequent paragraphs build on the benefits of napping, And in the final paragraph, the essay concludes that after a nap, people can be happier and more alert. The essay also draws a policy implication, suggesting that companies should provide nap time for employees to keep them lively and enthusiastic and to reduce the use of caffeine. Let's move on to organization. The essay is organized into 4 paragraphs. The essay uses transitional phrases to connect ideas between paragraphs. For example, the essay ends paragraph 1 with, "That is where napping comes into play," and then begins paragraph 2 with, "Napping, of course, is no replacement for sleep." Similarly, the essay begins the 3rd and 4th paragraphs with transitional phrases to link to previous ideas and to introduce new ideas or questions. The essay also uses a variety of internal transition words within paragraphs to connect ideas between clauses and sentences. For example, but, even, same kind of, another, and both of these studies. I've got enough evidence now to score the organization part of the first scoring dimension. For transitional strategies, I will highlight the level 4 descriptor, consistent use of a variety of transitional strategies to clarify the relationships between and among ideas. For the last indicator, I've highlighted the level 3 descriptor. As noted before, there is a progression of ideas that begins by raising the problem of sleep deprivation, then presents evidence of the benefits of napping, along with more evidence of the problem of sleep deprivation, such as the constant rush of innovation that keeps people fighting to stay awake during the nap zone, and finally the progression concludes with a policy recommendation. The progression of ideas is not quite a level 4 because, although the connections between ideas are clear, the essay flip-flops between a discussion of the problem, not enough sleep, in paragraphs 1 and 3, and the benefits of napping in paragraphs 2 and 4, rather than progressing logically from a focus on the problem to the solution. Overall, the preponderance of evidence that we have tagged related to this dimension suggests that a score of 3 is most appropriate. The summative comments at the top of level 3 capture the essay's quality well. There is an evident organizational structure. There are minor flaws, in this case an interrupted and incomplete discussion of the problem of lack of sleep and the benefits of napping. However, this does not affect the essay's overall coherence and sense of completeness. The organization is sustained and the response is generally focused. Let's move on to looking at the essay through the lens of evidence and elaboration. The evidence and elaboration dimension evaluates how well the essay supports the main idea. In this case, the student's thesis statement is found in the concluding paragraph. Napping is beneficial to the individual, and it benefits the people around that individual. The question is, does this essay present limited, adequate, or thorough evidence that supports this thesis statement? I've used my green highlighter to tag evidence for this dimension. The essay introduces the problem of sleep deprivation by integrating examples of sleep-deprived workers from source 2, people whose sleep is out of sync with their body clocks, such as shift workers, or is routinely interrupted, such as caregivers or emergency responders. In paragraph 2, the essay integrates scientific research evidence from source 1 about the benefits of napping, including details such as the precise length of naps that are optimal and how much they enhance mental performance. The essay returns to evidence from source 2 in paragraphs 3 and 4. The essay usually cites the sources, except in paragraph 3. The essay also integrates other ideas that are the student's own, not described in the sources. For example, the essay compares the benefits of napping to the drawbacks of coffee addiction. This comparison makes a connection to a real-world issue that is not discussed in any of the articles, that the problem of a sleep-deprived populace has resulted in an over-reliance on caffeine products. So let's score the evidence and elaboration dimension now that we have tagged some evidence. I've highlighted the level 3 indicators for adequate evidence is integrated and relevant. The evidence is not quite comprehensive, the level 4 requirement, because in discussing the problem of a sleep-deprived populace, the essay does not fully explain why it is a problem for all people, not just shift workers and healthcare providers. Nor does it discuss the effects of not getting enough sleep beyond poor work performance. I've highlighted the Level 3 indicator for adequate use of citations or attributions, even though there is a missing citation in paragraph 3. In all other paragraphs, the essay cites the source and paragraph from which the evidence is drawn. I have also highlighted the Level 3 indicator for elaborative techniques. The use of elaborative techniques is adequate. The essay includes examples of shift workers, caregivers, and doctors to briefly explain the sleep deprivation problem. The essay also makes a connection to a real-world observation that people are addicted to coffee to further emphasize the problem of sleep deprivation. The essay includes supportive details and evidence from research about the benefits of napping for mental performance, and evidence from history about the nap zone to develop the controlling idea that napping is beneficial. Let's step back for a moment and discuss the question, what are elaborative techniques? Smarter Balanced defines elaboration as the process of developing ideas by providing supporting details. These details may take the form of facts, definitions, examples, including selected, purposeful scenarios or anecdotes, descriptions, quotations, and explanations. In the sample we just reviewed, we saw the use of examples, facts, quotations, and explanations. Now, what about vocabulary and style? The vocabulary is generally appropriate for the audience and purpose, a newspaper article to be read by other students, parents, and teachers. The student uses many original phrases, not from the sources, that add an interesting flavor to the essay, such as hitting the hay, constant rush of innovation, and no wonder coffee is such a popular drink. In other parts of the essay, the student uses words and phrases like sleep-deprived populace, consecutive, periodic, and reign of coffee, demonstrating strong and precise word selection for a 7th grader. So, moving back to the rubric, I've highlighted the Level 4 indicators for clearly appropriate vocabulary and effective, appropriate style for audience and purpose. Overall, the evidence we collected warrants a score of 3 for this dimension. Although the essay uses a clearly appropriate and effective vocabulary and style, as well as precise language, the elaboration is adequate rather than thorough, and use of source material is adequate rather than effective. Elaboration of why sleep is so important to all people and how lack of adequate sleep can affect people's health and ability to do their jobs is not discussed in sufficient detail, given the amount of information on this topic provided in the sources. Finally, let's score the conventions dimension. I've used my blue highlighter to tag evidence for this dimension. Overall, I find that the essay includes few errors in language conventions. Mostly, they are capitalization and minor punctuation errors, and the few errors in usage are very minor, for example, on instead of at in paragraph 1. Overall, the evidence points to a score of 2 for conventions, which is the maximum score. The ratio of errors to the overall volume of writing is low. Overall, the student demonstrates a solid command of conventions for the grade level. Now let's review the steps for reading, collecting evidence, and scoring. We start by reviewing the task prompt, reviewing the scoring rubric, and reading the student sample with the scoring dimensions in mind. The next step is to tag or highlight evidence in the sample that is relevant for scoring particular dimensions of the rubric. Then, you highlight the level indicators in the rubric that match the evidence that you have noted. Finally, you select a score that best represents the preponderance of evidence for the focus of the dimension. The sample that we scored in this demo was not necessarily a typical sample in that it was selected to be a clear Level 3 anchor for 7th grade explanatory writing. It is typical to find more variation in the scores across indicators within a single scoring dimension. In this example, we see that the sample has varied strengths and weaknesses within the same scoring dimension. Scoring this dimension is not so neat and simple. In this case, how would you select an overall score for evidence and elaboration? We use a principle called the preponderance of evidence to make the scoring decision. We look at the strength of the evidence and we focus on what this dimension is truly about, based on the summative comments at the top of each column. This dimension is about providing elaboration of the main idea and use of source material to develop that main idea. Vocabulary and style is secondary, and citing sources is not mentioned. The preponderance of evidence thus suggests that for this sample, a Level 3 score should be selected. Despite weaknesses in vocabulary and style and lack of citations, the use of evidence and source materials, as well as elaborative techniques, outweigh those weaknesses to arrive at an overall score of 3. We don't average across the indicators to arrive at a score of 2. Instead, we select the score that best represents the characteristics of writing that are assessed in this dimension. Preponderance of evidence is not about the quantity of evidence, but about the strength of the evidence related to the focal criteria for the dimension. This concludes the video on gathering evidence and scoring using the Smarter Balanced Full Write rubrics.